At night, she woke up from her sleep with a feeling of disturbance. She had just had a bad dream that made her feel uncomfortable. You'll be heading for destruction. What kind of dream is this, she thought. How could it be the novel I know? This must be a misunderstanding. As she tried to distract herself, she saw a pink teddy bear next to her. This bear is somehow very familiar. When she tried to touch the bear, she was shocked to see it move on its own and greet her. Nice to meet you, kid. Thanks to you hugging me tight and falling asleep, the seal has been broken. She was shocked and remembered a similar bear in the novel she read, where the main female character's magic broke the seal. No, that's not possible. What's not possible? I am a spirit with special powers. Before the bear could continue, she took the bear and threw it, causing it to roll across the floor. Then, she ran as fast as she could towards the door and shouted, "This isn't right." Violet, who heard her voice from outside, felt surprised and immediately went towards her. "Little one," she called out. She ran towards Violet and hugged her tightly. Violet reciprocated the hug and tried to calm her down gently. "You must have had a bad dream, right? Don't worry, little one. Everything will be okay." With Violet's words and touch, she slowly became calm again. Wow, this is like magic, she thought with a feeling of relief and comfort, her eyes slowly closing. Not long after, she fell asleep in Violet's arms. Violet then took her to her room and laid her down on the bed carefully. After crying like that, she fell asleep right away. Yeah, she's still a kid, so it's different, Violet thought with a smile. When touching her cheek, Violet couldn't help but feel amazed. How cute! She looks so much like Aston. Suddenly, the door opened and a servant brought in a letter. "Miss, the DNA test results from the temple are out," the servant said respectfully. Violet opened the letter and read the results carefully. And true enough, the DNA test results confirmed that the child and Aston were indeed siblings, validating Violet's suspicions. The next day, in the Duke Aston territory, the child sat quietly in the living room of Duke Aston, a prominent family in the Ferdinian Empire and the wealthiest people on the continent. Violet, who was beside the child, smiled and handed her the same pink teddy bear as before. "Little one, this is a gift from me before you leave. Now that you're holding the bear, don't be afraid." The child received the bear with mixed emotions. "This teddy bear, don't tell me I've really entered the novel," the child thought, still speculating about the possibility that she had entered the world of the novel she knew. If this was the novel she knew, it was impossible for Violet to give her the bear, because in the novel, the main female character would never give the teddy bear to anyone else. Suddenly, a servant opened the door and announced the arrival of Duke and Duchess Aston. Both of them looked worried and disbelieving at what they saw. Duchess Aston burst into tears and said, "Could this child be?" The child looked confused and tried to understand the situation. Violet handed the DNA test letter to the two adults and explained, "I know this is confusing, but my guess is correct. This is the certificate of blood relation with Adrian, which comes from the temple." As they opened the DNA test letter, Duke and Duchess Aston looked disbelieving at what they saw in the letter. The Duke then ordered a servant to conduct another DNA test at the temple to confirm the results. The child, who began to understand the situation but still denied it, said in a small, stuttering voice, There's something wrong." However, before the child could continue speaking, Duchess Aston fainted, causing the child to immediately fall silent as everyone looked panicked. Two twin boys looked worried about Duchess Aston, and one boy who looked very familiar to the child. "Adrian Aston, I can no longer deny that I've entered a novel that's heading towards a crazy destruction," the child said with newfound awareness. The child then remembered the novel she read in her previous life. The End of Eternal Fireworks was a tragedy novel. The main character in the novel was Violet Fitz, the main male lead was Crown Prince Zircon Ferdinian, and Adrian Aston, who would become the second lead in the future. They three of them were childhood friends. In the novel, Violet and Zircon married in an arranged marriage, and Adrian, who secretly loved Violet, took his own life due to despair and heartbreak. He didn't know that Violet married Zircon out of duty, not love. By the end of the novel, all the main characters had died. In short, the novel was extremely depressing and dark, which perfectly matched its title. Why did it have to be a tragic novel? The child thought with frustration and sadness. Adrian Aston was her favorite character, so she didn't want him to experience a tragic fate in the future. A little while later, the day was still sunny. Violet looked uncomfortable and a cup of tea spilled because someone poured it. "Duke, the tea," Violet said, making Duke Aston realize that the tea he poured was already overflowing. Duke Aston then glanced at Violet and saw the child hugging her tightly. "It seems this child still feels unfamiliar, so she's scared of others," Violet said to everyone in front of them who was watching the child. The situation made the child feel uncomfortable because of everyone's stares, making her want to hide behind Violet's hug. A servant approached Duke Aston and informed him that a priest from the temple had arrived. Duke and Duchess Aston then met with the temple's representative, who said that the child had a 99.9% match with them, which meant the child was their child. "If you have any other requests for our temple anytime, the priest said, but before he could continue, Violet interrupted him and said, "Excuse me. You remember me, right? Actually, a few days ago, this child got injured, and I asked the priest to heal her, but until now, the wound hasn't healed well. So, can you heal this child again?" The priest replied stutteringly, "The timing isn't right." Before the priest could continue, Duke Aston, who was shocked by Violet's words, said, "What? Injured? What does that mean?" The Duchess also looked very anxious and asked, "Where? How severe?" Violet then smiled at the priest and said, "You heard that, priest? Healing. I hope this time you do it correctly." The priest remained silent because he saw Duke and Duchess Aston looking very worried about the child. He couldn't refuse Violet's request because Duke Aston was a major donor to the temple with a donation of 1 billion tar. Finally, the priest healed all the child's wounds, and instantly all the child's wounds disappeared in an instant. After being healed, the child suddenly felt sleepy. Maybe because it suddenly feels warm, I'm getting sleepy just for a moment. The child then fell asleep in Violet's arms, which made her feel safe and comfortable. In the room, the child fell asleep hugging the pink teddy bear and was lying on a small bed that fit her body size. A conversation between two children could be heard beside the sleeping child. "So this child is really our sister? But wasn't our sister supposed to be dead? Maybe she came back to life, like a living corpse. So she's like a little zombie who looks like mom?"
Lois, Luca.
"You guys have to be quiet." The two children turned around, and it was clear that they were twins. Lois was the child who didn't wear a hair tie at the back of her head, while Luca was the child who wore a hair tie. "If you're loud, she might wake up, so go outside and play," Adrian said with a soft but firm voice. The twins then left the room, leaving Adrian and the child who was still sleeping in the room. Adrian looked at the child with a gentle gaze, feeling a bit curious about the child who suddenly became part of their family. Meanwhile, Violet, Duke, and Duchess Aston were talking, with Violet explaining all the events about the child to her parents. Hearing all the explanations from Violet, Duke looked angry. The child was treated poorly in the slums. And Duchess cried uncontrollably because her child went through all that. "I remember a maid named Rosalind. She gave our child to Viscount Beryl, and it was all for money." "Impossible." Duke hugged his crying wife to calm her down. "Thank you so much, Violet. You saved our child. Finally, we can meet our daughter again." Violet smiled hearing Duke's words and said, "But what's the child's real name?" "Not the Viscount's name, but the name you both gave her." The Duchess replied, "Raffine. Her name is Raffine." Violet smiled hearing the child's name. "That's a very beautiful name." Violet felt relieved because she finally knew the child's real name, and she hoped to help Raffine live happily with her original family.